Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the technical workshop, An Ecosystem for Local Production of Diagnostics in Low and Middle Income Countries. On behalf of the co-host of this workshop, the World Health Organization, FINE, and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, as well as the rest of the members of the Working Group on Local Production and Diagnostics, we are delighted to welcome the over 300 participants that have registered for this workshop, and the distinguished list of speakers and moderators that will be joining us today. My name is Judith Rios San Juan, and I'm a policy specialist at the UNDP Health Team based in New York, and working on strategies to increase access to diagnostics, medicines, and other health technologies. Why are we here? Why are we convening this workshop? COVID-19 has highlighted the need for better strategies to increase access to diagnostics, including to diversify and strengthen manufacturing capacity in low and middle income countries. With that goal in mind, a group of agencies and experts decided to convene an informal working group, that is the working group, one of the working groups convened in this meeting, to improve the coordination and effectiveness of our efforts. The chair of the working group, Dr. Jenny Molloy from the University of Cambridge, will provide you the history and the background of this working group. This is our first public meeting where we are presenting the work that we're doing and the members of the working group. You will also be learning about the WHO and Costa Rica COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, or CTAP initiative that this working group supports, as well as the work of individual members of this working group in promoting local production and access to diagnostics in low and middle income countries. We're looking forward to your input to the work being done and to help us guide the next steps of our work. Some logistics and housekeeping guidance before we start. The meeting will run for 2.5 hours, and we have a full agenda, but we would like to hear from you. And we have allowed the webinar to have an interactive format. We will encourage you to actively ask questions and send up comments to the Q&A function that you will see at the bottom of your screen. The meeting is structured in 3 main sections: an opening panel that will present the context of this meeting, and then 2 roundtables. The first roundtable will present the different work and the different deliverables that the working group and the individual members of the working group are developing. The second roundtable will be an opportunity to learn and hear from experts in the manufacturing as well as in the regional sector capacity. We will have a Q&A section after each of the 2 roundtables to allow for discussion with the participants. The bios and the agenda are available in the same FINE website that you used to register for this meeting. So we will not be reading the full bios of all our experts and panelists. Finally, the meeting will be recorded and available online after this meeting. And now, without undue delay, let me have the pleasure to introduce the first speaker in the opening panel. Each speaker will have 2 minutes. Our first speaker is Dr. Adriana Velázquez from the World Health Organization. Due to an agenda conflict, Dr. Mariangela Simao will not be able to join us, but we are very glad and delighted to have Dr. Adriana Velázquez Verumen, that is the team leader for medical devices and in vitro diagnostics at the World Health Organization, an active member of this working group, as well of the steering committee of the WHO CTAP initiative. Welcome, Adriana. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Judith. And thank you all for your attendance to this meeting. On behalf of Mariangela Simao, our Assistant Director General, I'll take the floor and give you her message. This is very important that this meeting is jointly organized by WHO, UNDP, and FINE to discuss how to create an ecosystem for local production and increase access for in vitro diagnostics for COVID-19, specifically, as you heard by Judith, for low and middle income countries. As you all know, the situation is still challenging globally. Existing manufacturing and supply chain are not sufficient to meet the global demands for good quality, safe, and affordable health products required to prevent, diagnose, and treat COVID-19. One of them is the in vitro diagnostics, and those are critical for detecting and monitoring the spread of the virus. As WHO, we are seeing how over the last 18 months, strategies to increase local manufacturing capacity of in vitro diagnostics and other technologies in low and middle income countries is becoming a key priority for many governments, private sector and partners to strengthen responses for COVID-19, but also to respond to other health priorities and needs. The local production resolution, which was approved by member states last May during the World Health Assembly under the leadership of Ethiopia, is a clear example of that interest. Scaling up of local production in low and middle income countries is a key priority to strengthen national, regional, and global responses to COVID-19 and beyond, and to empower local industries to address local needs in the most efficient way, knowing the local challenges. WHO is engaged in the different efforts to facilitate technology transfer from technology holders and manufacturers to new manufacturers and provide the technical support for local production of in vitro diagnostics. WHO is also a member of the working group on in vitro diagnostics that the following speaker, Jenny Molloy, coordinates. As you may know, together with Costa Rica and more than 40 member states, as Judith just mentioned, WHO launched the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, CTAP. This initiative is to promote the sharing of knowledge, intellectual property, and data related to COVID-19 technologies, including in vitro diagnostics. This is a voluntary mechanism that aims to accelerate the scale-up of manufacturing to achieve global equitable access to these technologies through transparent, non-exclusive, and public health-driven licensing and enhanced technology transfer. Our colleague Erika Dueñas will be presenting more technical details about CTAP in the following panel. In this meeting, we would like to provide you with a general landscape of the challenges and opportunities for local manufacturing of effective and affordable in vitro diagnostics in low and middle income countries, and to outline the considerations that need to be taken into account. But we also want to hear from you, as Judith mentioned, what actions and strategies are needed to support the research, development, manufacturing, regulation, supply, and accessibility of in vitro diagnostics for low and middle income countries. I wish you a very productive discussion, considering the importance of impacting all those lives of undiagnosed patients. For them, we're all here together. So let me give the floor now to the following speaker. That is Dr. Jenny Molloy from the University of Cambridge, who is the chair of the Independent Local Production and Diagnostic Working Group, which grew from the UN Technology Access Partnership. Jenny, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriana. So I'm here in my capacity as the chair of the working group on local production diagnostics, which Judith did an excellent job of introducing earlier. I'll just give a little bit more of the background. So we were a subgroup of the Technology Access Partnership, which was a grouping of the World Health Organization, UNDP, and convened by the UN Tech Bank, with UNCTAD also involved in thinking about how to supply equitable, affordable, and sustainable access to health technologies in low and middle income countries, and particularly least developed countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. We did an amount of work during that time, which put us into contact with a lot of countries, a lot of local manufacturers, a lot of international manufacturers, and we really listened in many calls to the gaps that people felt were missing in terms of support for both technology transfer and also for technical support for local production. And so when TAP wound down its work at the start of this year, our working group continued to really try and fill what people were telling us were breaks in the information flow. So we're really interested in building local autonomy for production and innovation through sharing know-how that might otherwise not be in the public domain, and really trying to convene people who are interested in this whole area from a variety of perspectives. So I'd say the approach that characterizes our working group throughout its activities in nearly the last year now has been a level of openness. So open approaches to intellectual property and technology transfer, while also protecting financial sustainability. And we are fortunate to provide technical support also to CTAP, which has already been mentioned, and you'll hear more about later in terms of their efforts with technology transfer. We also are very open to participation, so we focus on convening a neutral space to hear from a variety of perspectives and a wide range of sectors on this issue of how to promote and support local manufacturing of diagnostics in a sustainable way, and such that the manufacturers produce diagnostics that are accessible and affordable to the people that need them. And we're now excited to bring this to a public forum and get your inputs on the types of work that we've been doing. But really the kind of message we got loud and clear from countries and from manufacturers during our work in 2020 was that there were certain types of information people felt they needed, and this has led to the deliverables that we'll be discussing today, which is a handbook aimed at manufacturers. Manufacturers told us that they needed particular support around understanding the necessary technical areas, regulatory areas to set up manufacturing. We also heard that there were gaps in terms of policy and understanding what countries and regions and organisations could do to promote this area. And we also heard that regulation in general was a confusing and challenge to navigate for many of the groups that we spoke to. So we spent a lot of 2020 listening and also convening and bringing people together. And for the first half of 2021, we've been trying to create content based on what we heard. And so, yeah, I'm incredibly excited to get the views of all of you. And thank you so much for taking the time today to really try and raise these deliverables and add value, and we hope that you'll continue to engage in the work that we're doing and greatly welcome that, because we all have a similar goal, which is to really increase access to diagnostics for the people that need it. So thank you very much, and I will now pass on to Bill Rodriguez at Find.
Thanks very much, Jenny. My name is Bill Rodriguez. I'm the CEO at Find. We're the Global Alliance for Diagnostics. And let me first begin by thanking our partners at WHO and UNDP for helping put this workshop together. For those of you who may not know Find well, our mission is to ensure equitable access to diagnostics around the world. I want to begin with a quote that's been circulating a lot over the past 18 months or so, and which really resonates with me. It's from the author William Gibson, who more than 20 years ago said, "The future has already arrived, it's just not evenly distributed." And let me explain why I find that relevant to the topic of local production of diagnostics, and probably most of you already feel the relevance of that statement. Before the pandemic, we already knew that essential diagnostic tests were only available in 1% of primary health clinics in low and middle income countries. They say that pandemics don't actually create new problems in the world, they just reveal all the existing problems, the cracks and fissures in society. And I think this pre-existing problem of inequitable access to essential diagnostics was immediately evident in the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic last year. We saw fragile supply chains, we saw nationalism, we saw systems that really didn't support equity, and fierce competition ensued for the scarce resources of diagnostic testing a year and a half ago. What we learned is that global supply chains aren't truly global, they're unevenly distributed. And Find was pleased to be the co-convener of what's known as the diagnostics pillar of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, or ACT Accelerator, along with our partners at Unitaid. And almost exactly 1 year ago, last July, we launched an expression of interest for local manufacturing capacity for diagnostic tests. And you'll hear more about that from Marta Fernandez-Juarez from Find. Along with our partners at Unitaid and with input from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the President's Foundation and the ACT Accelerator, we received 115 applications from 26 countries on 6 continents for programs to accelerate and improve manufacturing production locally in inequitably reached parts of the world. So I think what we've seen is that the resources are there, the interest is there, and what we need is to really accelerate the efforts and the discussions that you'll all be having today to try to improve and address this problem and boost capacity, local and regional innovation and local manufacturing capacity. These are essential for us to respond not only to this pandemic, but to future health needs. At Find, we draw on 2 decades of experience in diagnostics and in working in the ACT Accelerator over the past year on COVID. We believe, and our strategy is focused on building alliances like this one and focusing on local needs and local issues. So we're very pleased to be able to co-host this workshop along with WHO and UNDP, and I'm looking forward to the deliberations from a very distinguished panel of speakers and participants. So thank you very much. And with that, I have the pleasure to hand the floor over to Cecilia O, who is the program advisor for UNDP's HIV Health and Development Group based at the UNDP hub in Bangkok. Cecilia?
Thank you so much, Bill. Well, let me also thank, just like everybody else who's spoken before me, to thank all of you in attendance today for your time and interest in this meeting. I think along with all the other co-sponsors who've just spoken, UNDP is pleased to be part of this collaborative effort, which aims to introduce the work of the Working Group on Local Production and Diagnostics. I think it's clear that the working group aims to provide practical solutions to address the challenge of access to key health technologies, as we've seen, specifically diagnostics. We see this meeting and your participation in this meeting as an acknowledgement of the vital role for local production in low and middle income countries. It speaks to the need to increase and diversify supply capacity towards the very important goal of equitable and affordable access to needed diagnostics. I think Bill's also pointed to the fact that inequity in access to diagnostics is a key issue. And UNDP reiterates its commitment to the multilateral efforts to promote and facilitate local production to meet this goal. I think we know that local production and manufacturing, where it's successful and sustainable, can be a means to ensure reliable supply and availability to meet specific health needs in the countries and to reduce dependence on imports and donations. We've seen that the current global pandemic situation, that such security of supply is of vital importance. But we're also keen that this discussion today is not limited to the current situation, but seeks to address the medium and longer term needs for diagnostics in low and middle income countries. As such, we hope that the discussion will also be able to take into account local production of diagnostics across a range of diseases and how it can be sustainable and respond to the needs of low and middle income countries. I think we've also heard from Jenny that in our interactions with governments, manufacturers, and other stakeholders during our time with the Tech Access Partnership, a number of challenges have been highlighted to us. Among these were challenges that were faced in ensuring that investments in the production of new technologies, including diagnostics, are sustainable in the face of evolving regulatory, legislative, and policy contexts, as we've seen in this pandemic. UNDP joined this working group to work with partners to attempt to address some of these hurdles, taking the pressing need for COVID-19 diagnostics as a case study to understand how to get new products and how to deliver these new products from the perspective of existing and prospective manufacturers and other stakeholders. We definitely recognize the challenges of developing and executing such approaches and that they are multidimensional. We see this initiative as very much aligned with our core mandate, which aims to provide policy support to governments and country stakeholders to put into place an enabling political, legislative, and regulatory environment with which health and human development can be secured. So together with the partners in the working group, UNDP is working on 3 interrelated documents or deliverables, as Jenny's described. And we hope that these will help to identify, map, and propose recommendations and solutions to the bottlenecks in local production. So this meeting is therefore inviting you, the participants, as key stakeholders in this collaborative effort to contribute and improve the work that's been undertaken. We would like your help to identify issues that we might have perhaps missed, or highlight issues on which we should further focus on towards what I believe is the common goal for us all, which is the development and manufacture of diagnostics and the greater access to them. And this is where I'd like to stop and hand over to Judith, and I wish you all a very productive discussion and meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adriana, Jenny, Bill, and Cecilia. I think these were excellent opening remarks that really hopefully provided the context and the rationale for the work that we are doing together and highlighted the common interest on supporting public health and the public interest that brings us together. We are now ready to start the first roundtable. ecosystem building blocks and introduce the moderator and fellow working group member, Dr. Emmanuel Burati, the group leader of the Molecular Pathology Lab at the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology in Trieste, and professor at the University of Trieste. Dear Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you for all the participants to this meeting. I'm very proud and honored to be the moderator of this session. And I'm working at ICGB, that is a UN organization aimed at fostering research and development in biotechnology and genetic engineering in the developing world. I'm a basic scientist working on RNA. And without any further delay, I would like to introduce the first speaker of this session. That is going to be Marta Fernandez Suarez, who is the Senior Director of Research and Development at FIND, and she will tell us about post-COVID IVD funding and manufacturing landscape. So I'm handing over to Marta, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Emanuele, and thank you to the audience for joining us today. Now, as Bill mentioned in his opening remarks, at FIND, the Global Alliance for Diagnostics, our mission is to ensure equitable access to reliable diagnosis around the world, and have set for ourselves the goals of saving 1 million lives, $1 billion in healthcare costs, and empowering 10+ countries with diagnostics data to inform policy and care for our next strategy period. We are working to ensure that everyone who needs a test can get one. And to make that a reality, we know that we need innovation. Next slide, please. Thank you. And we believe that innovation is not only for technology, the development of new technologies, but also innovation in business models as well as in care delivery models, both globally as well as regionally and locally. As Bill mentioned, our new strategy is centered around an alliance model with an approach that puts country needs first. As you can see in the graphic at the bottom of this slide, we believe that fostering equitable access to diagnostics starts with the development of diagnostic tests that are appropriate to the needs of low and middle income countries through deep engagement and co-creation processes that include local and regional diagnostics researchers and developers. Along the value chain, there are other critical components before these appropriate tests are effectively integrated into the healthcare systems. Relevant to the conversation today, we know that boosting the capacity and fostering the local and regional production, along with diversification of the supply chains, is critical. And we're making this an effort that is critical, a critical pillar to our new strategy. We're already doing this through some investments in technology transfers and knowledge sharing, as Bill mentioned, and I will describe to you a bit later in this presentation. But before we go there, next slide, please. Although fostering local innovation and manufacturing is not really new to any of us, it is certainly true, as Judith mentioned in her opening remarks, that one of the reasons why we're all here today is because COVID-19 has shed a new light to this issue by highlighting the weaknesses in the supply chains. In this graph to the left, you can see a snapshot of April 2020, where we are comparing the share of the world manufacturing capacity, and you can see China being the largest manufacturer, followed by the US, Japan, Germany, and others, and how that compared to the share of the COVID-19 cases in 2020. What we saw very early in the pandemic is that the containment measures that countries impose were affecting major global production, having an impact on all countries globally. This same snapshot would have moved, as if we did this one along the months, other countries like the US or Germany, other major manufacturers would impose their own restrictions in import-export, essentially affecting global restrictions, and how many other countries impose nationalistic policies. Ultimately, what happened is that the low manufacturing capacity countries were unable to access those much needed diagnostic tests. And I should highlight that in the first months of the pandemic and up until not long ago, diagnostics were really our only tool and the first one to be developed to allow tests
test, trace, isolate, and contain them in the early phases. So really COVID-19 put this kind of magnifying glass on how a centralized manufacturing capacity and centralized supply chains will have a devastating effect in many countries around the world and their ability to respond to the pandemic. Next slide first, please. Another side effect of the COVID-19 pandemic that is relevant to our conversation today is that there was tremendous acceleration of both product development as well as an increase in manufacturing capacity. This graph here represents research that FINE has done through confidential interviews with many manufacturers of in vitro diagnostics products. And the graph is representing the increase in the manufacturing capacity of rapid diagnostic tests, RDTs, with the vast majority of them being contributed by antigen rapid diagnostic tests for COVID-19. So this graph was created in April this year over the last 12 months from April 2020 to April 2021. And there is a expected growth even more of another 85% in the next year. Again, one of the questions here is what's going to happen with this manufacturing capacity, how it's going to be preserved and utilized. But also importantly, and it's something that doesn't show well in this graph, is that this manufacturing capacity is still highly centralized. So although the capacity now is larger and is able to meet the demand in a situation like COVID-19, where the demand spikes and becomes really great, it still doesn't address the issue of diversification of the supply chains. Next, please. So in response to this phenomenon, and to increase the availability of high quality antigen rapid tests in low and middle income countries, as Bill already mentioned, FINE and Unitate on behalf of the ACT Accelerator launched a request for proposals last year with the goal of creating the supply conditions to meet the needs of LMICs. And the supply conditions includes the manufacturing capacity, the diversity of the supplier base, as well as affordability. There were two main work streams for this request for proposals. One of them was focused on investing in creating the global capacity to very quickly respond to the COVID-19 pandemic by having higher volumes available to low and middle income countries. The second work stream was very much focused on local manufacturing and technology transfers. And these are the two agreements that I would like to highlight today, in which we are investing in developers of in vitro diagnostic tests focused on antigen rapid tests that are transferring their products, their technologies to regional manufacturers. The two regional manufacturers are Diagnostics in Senegal, hosted at the Institut Pasteur of Dakar, as well as WAMA in Brazil. I should highlight that both of these investments are focused on increasing the volume capacity of manufacturing for these manufacturers, but beyond that also in strengthening their quality management systems for a sustainable operation for COVID and beyond for many years to come, and able to address other disease needs, as it was mentioned in the opening remarks. So long-term investments in increasing the capacity. Next, please. And I just want to finish my remarks by saying that obviously technology transfer investments are not going to be effective if they happen in isolation. There are other interventions that we need to work on and that I'm highlighting in these slides. These are all of the points that the different speakers are going to be touching on the next slide, so I won't dwell on them, but just to highlight a few. On the funding front, we need to explore additional sources of financing, including the private sector. We need to explore innovative business models, and Diagnostics is going to be speaking later today to describe one of those options. We need to foster common infrastructure and training programs at the country level so that there is enough resources to support this local manufacturing. There are also initiatives that we need to work on in regulatory and access to streamline regulatory policies and increase the access of these tests. Also in the procurement and supply management to explore policies that are not solely driven by cost, but take into account other factors such as driving the regional economies, and also interventions in policy and testing strategies. And with that, I will hand it over to Emmanuel, and I let the rest of the speaker delve deeper into every one of these issues. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Marta. So let me introduce the next speaker in this session. And let me also remind all attendees that if you have questions, you should ask them in the question and answer part of Zoom. Please don't use the chat, so that we have a clear idea how to structure the answer, the last session of the talk. So the next speaker is going to be Erika Dueñas. Erika Dueñas works at WHO headquarters in the Department of Medicines and Health Products, and she will tell us about technology transfer and licensing strategies. So Erika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just need the slides. Okay, so can you see the slides? I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today, as my colleague Adriana Velázquez said in the previous session. I'm going to share with you one of the initiatives inside WHO in order to get to realize equitable global access, which is named the CTAP, or the COVID Technology Access Pool. So next slide, please. Okay, so this came in May last year. This initiative was started by the President of Costa Rica, at the request of the President of Costa Rica, but together with our Director General. And now we count with more than 44 member states that joined this solidarity call to action, that you can see the list there. But it's basically a WHO initiative that it is complementary to the other initiatives that were mentioned before, like the ACT Accelerator, for example, in order to facilitate access to COVID-19 products. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm trying to pass it. So the key asks or principles from this solidarity call to action launched more than 1 year ago now are basically to promote innovation and to facilitate the sharing of knowledge, intellectual property, and data to improve access to COVID-19 related technologies, including vaccines, medicines, diagnostics, and any other medical devices. So this solidarity call to action also calls, for example, for the funders to include in these funding agreements provisions related to access to facilitate access in the future, because we think that access should be promoted not just at the end when we have already the final product in the market, but since the beginning of the value chain of the products, of the health products. So next slide, please. There are different asks to different stakeholders in the solidarity call to action. The previous one were for funders or governments. These ones are, for example, for the research organizations or the key technology holders, right? And the main ask is basically to tell them that voluntarily share these technologies through licenses or through different mechanisms. The CTAP is very flexible. It includes different possibilities for the different stakeholders to share their knowledge or their IP. For the IP, for example, it can be through the patent pooling of licenses. We will go into more detail in relation to that. But basically, to enable wider scale and worldwide production of the needed technologies, right? And we ask them also to share the genetic sequence information through different partners like GSAID. We ask them to put all the results of the research in the WHO Global Observatory database. Next one. And the main objectives, as I said, next one. You can, yeah, thanks. This CTAP, or this COVID Technology Access Pool platform, was created with different partners in order to implement this solidarity call to action. So, as I said, the main objective is to accelerate the scale up of the manufacturing of the key products or key technologies to get equitable access. So the next one, please. This is how CTAP is operating. We have a WHO secretariat, and we also have what we call implementing partners, because we didn't want to duplicate efforts of other initiatives that were already doing some good work, like the Medicines Patent Pool or the Open COVID Pledge. So we work together with them to facilitate the work they are doing, to support them if it's possible from the WHO side as well. So, for example, for CTAP, we created a steering committee. We just established or selected a technical advisory group as well. But we have the support from the WHO technical staff for the negotiations, for example, of these license agreements or technology transfer agreements inside CTAP. So we have the vaccines team. We interact for vaccines also with other departments, and for diagnostics, we are working closely with the colleagues like Adriana or Francis, that you probably know, that are working on diagnostics, and also from other departments. So the next one. This is just to show very quickly how we work. We have of course, we request to the R&D funders, to the research institutions or the IP holders to share their knowledge through CTAP. And then when this knowledge is shared in CTAP, for example, through licensing or tech transfer agreements, then we try to give these kind of sub-licenses, for example, to the manufacturers of vaccines, diagnostics, or therapeutics to do the rapid scale-up. We know that sometimes it's not only IP, technology transfer, it's needed as well. So that is why we include all these necessary steps. And of course, as you can see in the middle, WHO works with these platforms or this steering committee with the different UN agencies as well, and with member states, because Costa Rica, as one of the initiators of this initiative, also has a coordination with the other co-sponsors and member states co-sponsors of the initiative that are trying to facilitate this sharing. We are in interesting discussions with them, with member states as well, in relation to how they can work on different kind of incentives to promote the sharing of knowledge at the national level or at the regional level, for example. Next one. This is the model of voluntary licensing we are proposing for this situation, pandemic situation. At the beginning, you have the specific call of the solidarity call to action, that it translates basically in important principles in the licensing agreements. First, it's a voluntary mechanism. I think we should repeat that many times, because it's not compulsory in any way. The companies come voluntarily to offer their technologies. and they negotiate the content of the licenses, for example, through one of our implementing partners, which is the Medicines Patent Pool. One of the important criteria we think for access purposes is to have transparent licenses, to have non-exclusive licenses to many manufacturers as possible, of course, taking into account all the quality issues, to cover, if possible, ideally all WHO member states, but in particular low and middle income countries, include certain waivers on data exclusivity protection or other market exclusivities in order to promote access, or to include also technology transfer packages in these licensing agreements to facilitate the scale up. The next one, almost done. These are the current activities and discussions in relation to the CTAP. We are working on a very important tool for these negotiations, and a tool that will be also useful for other stakeholders that are working in this field, to have a basic information in a database. This is what we call the CTAP database, where we're going to include key information for some prioritized products, including diagnostics, like patents, licenses, regulatory information about some of these products. So, as I said, we work together with the member states. We not only the co-sponsors, but we provide also regular briefings to all member states in WHO. Now we are circulating this questionnaire on incentives to all member states to see how they can support the initiative. Of course, we are having regular meetings with the technology holders and civil society organizations, countries, research institutions, universities, etc. Next one. And in relation to diagnostics, of course, we're promoting the same, this sharing of IP knowledge and data. We are working very closely with the diagnostics group, as Judith mentioned at the beginning, and with other UN partners like UNDP, UNITAID, UNAIDS. And we are also trying to promote further collaboration between the ACTA diagnostics pillar, because they are doing a very important work in terms of the prioritization as well that we are taking into account. So then, of course, we have already some offers to CTAP about some diagnostics tools and antigen tests, CRISPR-based diagnostics, and I think we will hear more about that during this event. So I think that's my last slide, please. And this is just information about CTAP that you can find in this website. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Erica, for this very nice presentation. And now I will pass the time to Spring Gombe. Spring is a health policy advisor at UNDP. She used to manage the Tech Access Partnership, and now she is back in the local diagnostics working group that was born from that initiative. So, Spring, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and it's my privilege to be here and to be back and to present on behalf of this working group the three pieces of work that both Jenny and Judith described a little bit earlier. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Diagnostics Working Group sees these three building blocks as essential to achieve or to support governments, manufacturers, policymakers in creating both the ecosystem and also providing practical overviews and to help to support understanding on the part of manufacturers to get diagnostics from an idea to people who need them where they live. The three pieces of work are a roadmap, which is a checklist with recommendations for policymakers primarily to create the enabling environment that is necessary for local manufacturing to take place. The second piece of work, which is being led by Jenny, is a Diagnostics Handbook, which really provides practical overviews of the key issues and steps that manufacturers working in low and middle income countries need to address in order to get products to people. And finally, as Jenny had alluded to in the beginning, there is real confusion, nervousness, uncertainty about the regulatory context in which manufacturing is done. And so there's a regulatory mapping that summarizes the key information on global and the national regulatory landscape that manufacturers, their supporters, their donors, their funders would need to address in order to have a robust regulatory strategy and to make sure that safe, quality products get to people. Next slide. I'll attempt to describe each of these pieces of work in a little bit more detail. They are works in progress. In many cases, they have been derived from consultations, both formal and informal, with experts in the particular areas. So the roadmap is based on a consultation that was taken in February 2021, organized by the University of Cambridge, Department of Engineering and Institute for Manufacturing. And it convened a number of experts from various sectors and various disciplines to try and understand what the key priorities were to enable technology transfer, to set a vision for how to maintain technology and sustain technology transfer and production of diagnostics into the future. And as Cecilia said, we're trying to look at this not from the perspective of what can we do for COVID now and simply devise strategies for an acute crisis, but really to create a long-term sustainable environment. The intention of the roadmap, once complete, is to provide guidance for the short term, so in the next 1 to 3 years, into the mid and long term. And as you can see, the end intention is that there are very easy to use tools in the hands of people. So the priorities identified, the 6 priority areas identified for the development of incentives for funding, the building of manufacturing capacity and the facilitation of the importation or the supply of the materials necessary for production, the creation of an enabling policy environment, and then understanding the intellectual property landscapes that govern all of these in order that transaction costs could be reduced, innovation and access could be increased, and the process of engaging with the regulatory pathways would be streamlined for all policymakers and also then for manufacturers. Next slide. The Diagnostics Handbook, the work in progress that it is, has 4 major goals. And the first is to provide the general landscape of the importance of undertaking local manufacturing and LMICs, the challenges and the opportunities that exist at present, and how those might be addressed in collaboration with policymakers and other stakeholders. Manufacturers will need to give consideration to the requirements and steps, each step of the way in the manufacturing process, and to the extent that they're only addressing one part of the manufacturing landscape, how they relate to other manufacturers, how they relate to completing the ecosystem of manufacturing, and also to give policymakers in their country some kind of understanding of innovative approaches that might be taken. And as Jenny mentioned, Diatropics will later be speaking about some of those lessons that can be learned from experiences that are underway. And then finally, the goal of the document is also to link out to further resources and support mechanisms that are available to manufacturers that they may not yet know of and may not yet have considered as tools to ease their entry into or their further development of the manufacturing process. There have been a number of workshops that have been undertaken in preparation of this Diagnostics Handbook, 3 in between the months of February and May. These were and continue to be led by the University of Cambridge in partnership with the UN Tech Bank for the least developed countries. The handbook has been divided practically into 7 sections. The first looks at a target product profile. So what are the minimum and optimal performance and operational characteristics of diagnostics that are needed? What are the challenges to produce each of those? What opportunities exist now or could be created in order to get to the diagnostics that we need? The second is for manufacturers to understand the context in which they are operating, again, looking at challenges, tools, and support mechanisms that may be available, but also providing them with the opportunity to raise those issues with the various policymakers at the national or the regional or global level. And then the meat of the handbook is in the practicalities of the diagnostic manufacturing. We have decided to focus on molecular diagnostic kits for nucleic acid tests and lateral flow assays as case examples, and then using those to explore comparative advantages for different kinds of manufacturers, considerations for manufacturers in terms of whether they want to do things in-house or partner with third parties, what they need in each of those situations, what processes and facilities they might also require in order to undertake manufacturing. Quality is central to all of this, and so there's a detailed case being prepared that explains stepwise what a lateral flow manufacturing process might look like, what the finished product might look like, the components of manufacturing, and the quality manufacturing considerations that are necessary at each step. In the Diagnostics Handbook and also in the regulatory mapping document that I will speak about next, there is a significant section on regulatory compliance because that was identified as an area of confusion. This document will provide a short introduction to the options available for regulatory approval, including the WHO processes, and then the regulatory document that I'll speak about next goes into that in far more detail. Finally, we look at technology licensing, principles and best practices for LMICs, models to facilitate licensing, tech transfer, local production, and then also considerations that manufacturers may not have taken into account previously, which is their role in technical advocacy for the enabling environment and for multi-sectoral engagement with all of the actors who are relevant for manufacturing. Next slide. So the regulatory mapping that's underway is coordinated by WHO and UNDP. And the goal of it is to provide an introduction to the regulatory requirements and processes, to explain to manufacturers who may not previously have been engaged in this area or may not have been aware of the importance of regulation, and to do this as early as possible in the process of manufacture and to integrate regulators as early as possible into the process of manufacture so that local, the design processes, the local production processes are actually in line with best practice. We're trying very much to do this as speaking to manufacturers in LMICs and their partners and funders. Again, we're looking at timelines, transaction costs, the need to understand what they might be, how to address each of these, how to be as comprehensive as possible to create technologies that have the quality, safety, and efficacy standards that are required. And then we also have a goal of providing the mapping of guiding regulatory guidelines and requirements. So these might be national, for example, from Australia, the US, Japan, South Africa, or they might be regional in those parts of the world where integration is being sought. Again, the mapping is provisionally divided into the chapters that are detailed on the right-hand side. So the overview, the definition of the IVDs and the risk in vitro diagnostics, the risk class and classifications, convergence and divergence of risk assessment tools in each of these classes and by each of the types of regulatory manufacturers, going into the product and QMS assessment processes, providing examples to enable manufacturers to understand what these assessment processes look like in practice, what they will need to go through, if harmonization is in place, why it matters, what is underway to achieve it, and what the implications are for the various manufacturers. And then to leverage regulatory approval and requirements for their submissions, giving comparative classifications among different regulators by country, by region, classifications for in-country use, classifications for export, and providing case studies from those that have established regulatory infrastructure, but also from countries that don't have established regulatory infrastructure, because that is a large number of countries, and if manufacturers wish to enter into working into those, there are different requirements that they will have to consider when they are seeking regulatory approval. We also have a chapter on post-marketing surveillance and potential, not potential, I apologize for that typo. And then we go into some detail on the resource needs, including specialist skills, specialist personnel and competencies, the fees in the regulatory process, the timelines that manufacturers can expect to be encountered with. And finally, because this is particularly relevant for the least developed countries, but also for other LMICs, we provide some overview of the WHO regulatory guidelines and assessments on pre-qualification, the essential diagnostics list, and emergency use licensing, and then have annexes which provide additional resources. So those are the three documents for which we would like to have your inputs. In fact, have we left anything out? Are there any glaring omissions? Are there any nuanced ones that we might like to consider? Does this provoke any thoughts on your part for how we can continue to take this work forward? I thank you, and I will hand back to Emanuela.
Thank you, Spring. And then let me introduce the final speaker of this session, who will be Stein de Borgreve. Stein is the diagnostic advisor of infectious diseases at Médecins Sans Frontières, and he will speak to us about policy recommendations to enhance local production of IVDs in low and middle income countries. So, Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And first of all, thanks a lot to FINE, WHO, and UNDP for hosting this important workshop today, and also to all the participants for joining this workshop. So next slide, please. So today, the same day of this event, we have published, or we are publishing, an issue brief on local diagnostics to meet local health needs. And this policy brief is based on a large mapping of local manufacturers of diagnostics in LMICs, and we focus primarily to Africa and to South America. So we did desk reviews and interviews with 67 manufacturers and donors and global health actors. And based on the data and the analysis of those data, we came with policy and advocacy recommendations on how to improve the sustainability of local production of diagnostics in LMICs. And of course, COVID has triggered this issue because it has uncovered the limitations of the current diagnostic market and the need for more local production of diagnostics. But please note that those recommendations are not only limited to COVID, but expanded to and applicable to all diagnostics in general. Next slide, please. So now I will take you through the key recommendations in the brief. So a first bucket of recommendations is about creating an enabling environment. And the first recommendation is that there should be enough investments in local production from governments, donors, also development banks. It is important that, for instance, for governments, that these investments don't only come from the health and the science and technology budget, but also, for instance, from industrial budgets, which are typically much larger. The second recommendation is to develop buy local policies. So it's all about trust in local products that are quality assured. It's also important to have sufficient local demand creation, and pooled procurement mechanisms can help to do that. So we do have the African Medical Supply Portal for COVID tests and COVID tools. We do have, for instance, GDF for TB tools, but regional pooled procurement mechanisms that go beyond single diseases, so for multiple diseases, would definitely be beneficial. Next slide, please. A second bucket of recommendations is to promote open IP, to promote technology transfer, and to open access conditions in innovations. So first recommendation is that diagnostic innovators should openly license technology, and especially when they receive public funding to develop the technology, they should be willing or supportive to openly license, for instance, to WHO CTAP. It's important that this is not only about patents, it's also about know-how. Which is much more important in diagnostics. So it's not only about the patents, it's mainly about the know-how. There are tools, for instance, the TRIPS waiver proposal. Important to know is that the TRIPS waiver does contain diagnostics, and it does contain also know-how as part of the IP. A second recommendation is that government should support both end product and also raw material technology transfer, and also the local innovation. So here it is important that when we talk about supporting local production, it shouldn't stop like with producing a local finished product. We should also think about production of the raw materials in country or in the region as far as possible, and also to promote more local innovation. A third recommendation is that governments and other funders should mandate open science and open access conditions in public funding agreements. So especially during COVID, we have seen a lot of public funding to manufacturers with often little conditions in terms of return to the public, in terms of open access of the technologies. So we think that when there is public funding agreements, there should be a condition for open sharing and open access to the developed technologies for the public. Next slide, please. Then a third bucket of recommendations is about ensuring that the local production meets the local health needs. And a key example for that is the picture that you see on the upper right about the Bio-Rad's IT LAISH test. So that's a test, an RDT, to diagnose Kala-Azar, visceral leishmaniasis. And basically it's the best test that we have in East Africa, where Kala-Azar is endemic. Now, Bio-Rad has announced that from May 22 onwards, it will stop the production of the IT LAISH test. So this will have, or would have, a dramatic impact on many control programs in East Africa. So this is a typical example of a test where we shouldn't be dependent on a high-income country manufacturer to supply the test, but also this type of test should be able to be produced locally. And these are low volume tests, and the market is fragile. And of course, local manufacturers shouldn't always or only look into low volume tests. For instance, high volume tests, for instance, malaria tests, could also be considered as, for instance, as a second priority. But of course, government should be aware that for these high volume tests, for instance, they should be willing to pay a little bit more in order to have sufficient competition for these local producers with the high volume producers, for instance, in high income countries or Asia. And the second recommendation is that government should invest also in non-profit and public manufacturers, because if we want to have a sustainable supply, a sustainable local production that do meet the local health needs, profit shouldn't be the driver. The local health needs should be the driver. And non-for-profit models, business models, public business models could help in that. And we do have examples. For instance, in Africa, we have Diagnostics, who will present in the next session. That's a non-profit local manufacturer in Senegal. In terms of public manufacturers, we do have already since a decade Biomaninos in Brazil, who produces also diagnostics for Brazil. So it's important that investments do also consider these type of models. Next slide, please. Then another bucket of recommendations is about strengthening the regulatory mechanisms, because it's really key that diagnostics are quality assured. And this is not only to ensure quality of clinical care, but it's also to build trust in products if they are quality assured. So a recommendation is that governments and donors should strengthen national regulatory authorities, but also ensure regional harmonizations. And in terms of the latter, for instance, the African Medicines Agency, the AMA, that is now setting up and hopefully will be ratified by sufficient number of countries, could be an important mechanisms on the African continent. And then a last recommendation is that experienced manufacturers, for instance, when there is a technology transfer from a manufacturer to a local manufacturer, that it doesn't stop at just transferring the technology, but that there is also transfer and support of knowledge on how to submit and prepare dossiers for regulatory approval in the region, but also globally, such as WHO PQ. So we think that can be part of technology transfer agreements to have a stronger national and regional regulatory authorization bodies. Next slide. So I will stop here. So all the recommendations are also online since today. So this is our general website, but I will post in the chat also the specific link to access the brief. So in the brief, you will read more details about the recommendations, but also the background and the data that we collected, how we came to those recommendations. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out in case of any questions or in case any follow-up would be useful for your work in terms of policy and advocacy in your countries or with other actors. And yeah, finally, thanks again to WHO, UNDP, and FINE for hosting this workshop. Also, special thanks to Jenny Molloy from University of Cambridge for pooling the working group and all the work that has led to this webinar. And then also a special thanks to Terry Roberts, who did an amazing consultancy work with us to collect the data, to analyze, and to support us in writing the brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stein. Thank you very much. So we are ready to open the question and answer session. We are unfortunately running a little bit late, so we won't be able to spend a lot of time on this, but we are trying now to answer all the some of the questions through the chat. But let me just open a little bit a question for Marta, because several of the attendees have asked about the possible restrictions on and safeguards on sharing reagents in this emergency. So Leslie Ong and Kathleen in England both commented on this. Can you say something about this, Marta?
Absolutely. Thank you, Emanuela. And thank you for the questions. So, I mean, the safeguards is obviously a very important question that we have in mind. We are still in the process, we're started with some investments as we're thinking about those regional manufacturing hubs. One of the key questions, as I described, is the political buy-in and policies that country or that region may have in place. And as you very rightly pointed out, one of those is what are the current import-export facility, ease of import and export, what are the current policies, as well as what has been their positioning throughout the pandemic. So while I cannot speak to the specific safeguards, that is one of the critical criteria that we're using as we are entering discussions for where those regional manufacturing hubs should be placed. And I think everybody's very well aware of that And then just to respond to Kathleen England as well, question on other pandemics and other diseases that are affecting the countries like HIV, NTB, and malaria. Absolutely, that's really top of mind. And as I mentioned, for the investments that we have made, as well as the ones that will be forthcoming, the investment goes beyond COVID. But we are investing in facilities and entities that are strong enough to manufacture products and make them available to the region well beyond COVID. And in fact, some of the agreements that are in discussion already include other products beyond COVID antigen rapid tests, are already included in the agreement as follow-up products to be transferred and negotiated within the agreement. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta. There are also several questions, and this is for Erica, regarding companies that are currently in connection with CETAP and on how they can do this. So can Erica please spend a few words on this issue?
Sure, thank you very much for many interesting questions. I tried to put some answers in the chat, but in relation to the companies, we had some offers already. Some are public, some not. Some of the offers are not yet public. We are in discussions with the different companies, in particular in relation to diagnostics. We do have also a couple of companies in relation to vaccines. There is still no concrete sharing in CETAP. It's already 1 year of the mechanism, but we really believe that it can be a very a good solution to the problems of the lack of manufacturing in certain fields. So that is why during the last World Health Assembly, the Director General, again with the President of Costa Rica and other countries, relaunched the initiative. During that relaunch, we had, for example, the Research Institute from Spain, who offered to share some diagnostic tests. So we are in negotiations with them to try to sign a license agreement that can be that can then go to other manufacturers, and that includes intellectual property sharing and also technology transfer. So there are others in discussions, but unfortunately I cannot share all the information right now. So, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Erica. There is also several questions for Stein, and perhaps one that you could answer immediately online. It regards the barriers for local manufacturers, also connected with the access to market. Do such barriers exist for diagnostic, like for medicines, or not?
Yeah, it's a good question, and indeed the barriers are also there for diagnostics, and we do have examples of, for instance, of countries where they have local products, right? A local manufacturer producing a test, but even the country is not procuring from that company because they also only procure from, for instance, procured product. So there are similar barriers, and it's all about strengthening local regulatory authorization processes, hopefully to the same level like WHO PQ. So I'm sure that, for instance, the regulatory mapping that was presented by Spring earlier will be a good start in terms of what is the pathway to a good regulatory process for the manufacturers, but hopefully also for the national and also for the regional.
Okay, thank you, Stein. And I think because of time, we will answer the rest of the questions separately. The last question that I think would be well to answer live is to Spring regarding the final publication of the handbook and roadmap that we have all been working so hard in the past few weeks. So Spring.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'll be short. Well, we'll push the diagnostics working group ever harder. Our ambition, of course, is to have these to you by the fall. We're taking inputs in this meeting, so if we've left something out that's really important in any of those documents, it might take a little bit longer, but we are hoping by the end of the third quarter to have them ready. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Spring. And now I will pass the job of the moderator to Sharon Ann Lynch for the next session of this meeting. So Sharon Ann.
Thank you, Emmanuel. My name is Sharon Ann Lynch. I'm with the Georgetown University, the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law. It's my pleasure to moderate this third panel. What we're going to be doing is hearing from a number of developers and manufacturers, and then some of the regional entities and national actors about their plans to foster local production. So you've already heard so much that has come up in terms of various issues as well as opportunities. Let us start first with some questions for the developers and manufacturers. We will hopefully have time for questions. We're going to be taking this session up until 4:25 CET for those of you in CEST time zone. So please use the question and answer function as you see it. And when possible, please note which panelist you would like to direct your question to. So to begin with our first panelist is Dr. BK Chow of BioNote in South Korea. So the question for you, Dr. BK, is you obviously have a wealth of experience in conducting technology transfers. Could you please comment on what are the most common mistakes or roadblocks and how you think these can be addressed or overcome? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sharon, for your introduction. BioNote is based in South Korea, and I can say that BioNote is very high R&D oriented and also high volume manufacturing company. And we have high capabilities to generate high performing reagents such as recombinant protein and recombinant antibody and monoclonal antibodies. We have a sister company named SD Biosensor, and now we are under the technology transfer project with one organization in one African country. The transferred product will be a COVID antigen test, but together with that, it includes personal training and quality management system, and also it includes a selection, installation, and qualification of the equipment. The targeting production capacity is around 50 million tests per year. And the transferred product will not be limited to COVID-19 antigen test. We are going to transfer HIV, syphilis, and malaria RDT. And these are WHO pre-qualified products. So in fact, as you explained, we already have a local production experience in India and Indonesia, so we hope this technology transfer experience will be also be helpful in our technology and transfer project at the moment. So I'd like to take some examples that we experienced in our previous technology transfer project. So when a product is transferred, we need to have the equivalency study of the two sides product for the validation of the transferred product. So for this purpose, we need to send raw material, semi-finished goods, finished goods, and QC panel and a specimen. But recently, the export and import process of these material, especially a biological material, is a very, very difficult and time-consuming process. So to overcome the biological material shipment, so we try to replace those materials with artificial materials, or also we try to source those materials locally. Yes, so I would like to mention the QC panel and the specimen issue when we consider the technology transfer. Secondly, in RDT production, the humidity and temperature control is very, very critical. So when the site is very hot and very humid, also when it is a rainy season, a strict and strong temperature and humidity control is required for production process and storage of raw material and finished goods. Finally, I would like to mention the regulatory registration process. So when the local site is, when the product is transferred, the local site is a new legal and actual manufacturer. So regulatory registration process is needed again. So also the study and understanding of these regulatory registration process in the country is required for cost and time saving. This is a brief introduction of BioNode and some experience we had in our previous technology transfer. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for trying to do the impossible, which is to fit your experience with technology transfer in 3-minute remarks. But we'll also have the opportunity for more discussions and as well some questions for you. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Chakraborty at the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR in India. Now, Dr. Chakraborty, you have offered a non-exclusive license, as we've heard, of your CRISPR-based COVID diagnostic test to the CTAP initiative, which is very welcome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And what we would like to know is, how do you think CTAP can facilitate technology transfer and local production, along with the other ecology of actors, including MPP? So, and also if you could speak to what was your motivation? Why did CSIR make the offer of technology to CTAP? Thank you very much. Over to you. And over to your children. Now we know why you made the offer of technology to CTAP, to make a better world for your children. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation and allowing us to present here. So yeah, I think the work that we have been doing as a part of CSIR IGIV, it actually started a couple of years back, trying to find affordable solutions for nucleic acid detection, actually in rural India. in a sequencing-free manner. And we work with the basic biology of CRISPR proteins, use this Cas9 protein that we are working with as a part of the diagnostics, which is Francisella novicida Cas9. And we found that it has some very interesting properties of very high specificity in discriminating between point mismatches. So the initial work was actually to try and distinguish between two nucleotide sequences which are very similar but may be distinguishable by one mismatch, and this is actually the basis for most Mendelian disorders. And we were targeting sickle cell anemia predominantly. It's a huge problem in a lot of countries including India, and the possibility of doing carrier screening and so on. It was very easy to convert this into CRISPR-based diagnostics for COVID-19 during the pandemic. And we started with giving a non-exclusive licensing of this product, and one of the companies took it further, which was Tata Medical and Diagnostics. I think CTAP is also in talks with them as well. And this company then went across, did set up a new plant. Of course, CRISPR Diagnostics is something relatively new. I think the first FDA approvals or emergency usage approvals came only last year for two different technologies, Cas13 based and Cas12 based. And this particular company, Tata Medical and Diagnostics, then they set up their plant, increased the manufacturing scope, and then later on went ahead and got the regulatory licenses in India. And the regulators essentially classified it as an equivalent to real-time PCR. The advantage of this methodology is that it allows you to essentially get the readout in the form of a paper strip assay, which is very similar to that of an antigen test essentially. So that gives you a kind of a visual readout, and we developed an app, a smartphone app, which can take the picture of that strip, and then it is AI trained, so you don't even have to rely on your eyesight to make an assumption whether it's a positive sample and negative sample. So this has got regulatory clearances in India. Recently, I think they also got the CE certification, and they have made their own improvements in converting this into end-to-end robotic platform, which can fit into a vehicle and move across villages and rural India, basically bringing the CRISPR-based testing to the people instead of people having to come to a diagnostic center, in different parts. What I wanted to just maybe a last minute to share is that very recently we have upgraded this test again, just to emphasize that it works on the principle of a protein interacting with a nucleic acid or a DNA or an RNA. So we upgraded it into a format by which we can very specifically detect the variants. So all the major variants of concern. So it could be the P1 or the Delta, by allowing you to discriminate whether the particular sample is not just SARS-CoV, but also is it the P.1 variant or is it the Delta variant or so on. So we think that has a lot of application possibly in terms of disease surveillance, vaccine efficacy, because vaccines with respect to different variants is still is a kind of an ongoing story. And this technology is now, it just got published in eLife, and it's called RAY, or Rapid Analysis of Variants, Rapid Assay for Variant Analysis. And yeah, I think we are very happy that CTAP has started engaging with us with CSIR predominantly to take this technology more to people and help the possibility of sharing these resources, which are essentially not driven by RT-PCR machines, because we have found out that, for example, in India, for example, a lot of labs had normal PCR machines, but it took them a lot of time to get RT-PCR machines, which are, let's say, 20 times the cost of a normal PCR machine. And since you do not require that over here, and you can even do it isothermally without the need of a PCR machine, it becomes more suitable for point of care settings.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to you or someone else also developing a TB test and DRTB with that same technology. Thank you. And again, thank you for the contribution to CTAP. Now, let's turn to Dr. Amadou Sall, the General Administrator of the Institute Pasteur of Dakar. in Senegal, which is a founding partner of Diagnostics. You heard Estain mention that the business model is a nonprofit one, which is very welcome when it comes to health medical tools, obviously, that are too often treated as profitable commodities. So Dr. Amadou Sall, could you please tell us more about the business model and how you are working to make Diagnostics a sustainable business while still maintaining and still staying true to your mission in terms of providing low end user prices? Thank you so much. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and also for all the participants and organizer for inviting us. So, as you clearly mentioned, Diagnostics is a non-for-profit initiative that is hosted by Institute Pasteur in Dakar. But I think one of the main things before coming to the business model is really the value of partnership. We have been really supported with Diagnostics from the beginning by FIND, Fondation Malaria, and IRD. And this has been very critical, because it's also allowed to have more partner industry like Molloy, Malaria, and Variance. And the fact that we can have this partnership has been really extremely important to leverage when it's come to setting up a non-for-profit business model. The business model really is based on 4 main principles. I mentioned the first one, having like very good partners. And when we talk about partners, we're talking about technical partners. We're talking that give knowledge, like we're having right now with Bionaut and Molloy, and partners that would support the ecosystem, as FIND is doing. I'll get back to that a little bit later. And out of the good partnership, we have this model really focused on demand, meaning that Diagnostics would not manufacture any test for which there is no demand. So when there is a demand, that's where Diagnostics would actually start manufacturing. So they don't have actually to look for a market. They would focus on where the demand is, which is a way also to cut costs significantly. The third pillar on which we're working is really making sure that we can have affordable supply. And this is really based on 2 main things. Number one is we are working in a model where each different partners, part of the Diagnostics, is supporting the platform through some membership that they give annually. And this membership is supposed to actually take in charge the platform cost, the functioning cost, in terms of human resource, in terms of functioning. And by this membership, all the manufactured product would really has to take care of the cost of goods. So, and which is the second pillar. So anything that is manufactured would be actually sold at the cost of goods. So by having this process, we can have something that is affordable in terms of supplies, because you neutralize all the different functioning costs. And any partner can make, actually can get access to those tests at very low cost, meaning cost of goods. And the third and the last pillar is really we're focusing on local manufacturing, because by doing that, first we can get costs, but also we can integrate actually Diagnostics in where the needs are, and can also reduce the cost in the way that we reach public health contacts and also public health key players. One thing which is important about this partnership, we're also partnering with key stakeholders in public health. In this regard, we're working with Africa CDC, we're working with West African Health Organization, one our main partner in West Africa. And by doing that, actually, because they support the platform, they also give access to 15 different countries in West Africa. All of them have this access to cost of goods price of test. So that's mostly where this model is based. And what is important about this model is it is just charging the cost of goods with a little margin. And that little margin actually is dedicated to actually develop and make sure that the pipeline of different tests are happening, and R&D can also happen. And that's how, through the different support of different organizations like MSF, like Wellcome Trust, and like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we came to some pipeline where we are actually having Ebola tests being actually prepared. We have also measles and rubella tests being prepared. And at the same time, we are also having meningitis done with the support of MSF. So This is very important because when we talk about setting a business model, we're not talking just only about COVID, because obviously today, the first product to respond to that demand has been COVID, not only antigen, but also antibody. But by doing such a kind of approach where we focus on emergency and pandemic, we also look at the future where the pipeline would actually feed that platform with very accessible product and affordable. Last remark I want to say is that we have been very successful, and thanks to the support of FINE and United, to actually receive some support through this expression of interest. And this would actually help Jetropic expand that model with expanding this capacity, bringing more support into regulatories and quality management system, which is also strengthening the whole environment. And third, being able actually to strengthen the organization per se by bringing more human resource, more capacity in project management. And this is absolutely critical. So to sustain the business model, that's what I can say. It's just about having a couple of good ideas, good partnership, and make sure that you're caring for the futures and get support from very strong partners. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that and for your work in this field. We'll have, I hope, more time to spend and learn from your experience. But now, moving on, as always, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Felipe Maricandi, who is with WAMA, the Diagnostica in Brazil. Dr. Felipe, I understand that you market your test in Brazil as well as other countries in the region. Could you please describe the barriers and challenges in supplying your tests outside of Brazil and how you are overcoming them? And obviously, please do introduce yourself, your work, the company's work. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this meeting. Thank you for the World Health Organization and FIND to give us the opportunity to participate in such an important program. I'm gonna talk about Vama Diagnostica. That is a company from Brazil. Belongs in a group, American group that is been working diagnostic for more than 70 years. Vama is a leader of marketing, rapid test market in Brazil. We starts to develop this business, the rapid test business, for 15 years ago, and we are a pioneer here in Brazil for this technology. Vama also is the only company in Brazil that manufacture urine strips, and we have and also we have like a lot of tests that we developing, we sell here in Brazil for infectious disease. We have HIV, hepatitis C, HIV. We participate in a lot of programs here, federal programs. And we are a very recognized brand here in Brazil. We've been one of the first brand that starts to working with this technology in Brazil. About your questions, we know that we have like a huge, we have some barriers about how we're gonna sell these products abroad Brazil. But we are we have a very good relationship with the federal government here, that we are talking to them to help us to access another countries. We've been working for like 2 months and talking to a lot of countries. We're in touch with Mexico, Colombia, Peru. We started developing these business models. We know that's one barrier to expand our operations abroad Brazil is the cost of Brazilians' costs is very high. But with this program, transferring technology, I think we will be able to have a good price and have and to deliver to these countries. But I'm very pleased to work with this program. VAMA is very exciting to be on this and help the population with the access to the rapid test diagnostics for COVID, and the future further for another disease that we're going to be prepared for that. Okay, thank you.
Obrigado. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your comments. Now let's turn to our next speaker. We do have an opportunity now to hear from the regional entities and national bodies in terms of both their plans. So it's both your perspective, your recommendations to others, but concretely your plans to foster local production of diagnostics. So to start with Africa CDC, Dr. Yinu Kebede Debeji is the head of Division of Laboratory Systems and Networks. And we have a question for you. I'm sorry, it's a big question, so I apologize, but I'm sure everyone is very eager, if they don't know already, to hear from you about what are Africa CDC's plans to foster local production in the region. And we know there are many barriers. So take your pick in terms of what do you think the most critical barriers are and how do you plan to address them? So I apologize already for that very large question, but we are all looking very forward to hearing from you. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting Africa CDC for this very, very important session. I would like to recognize my colleagues in this panel. 2 years ago, recognizing the importance of access to diagnostics and to bring this also at higher level as an agenda to the continent, Africa CDC and partners, we came together and we launched the African Collaborative to Advance Diagnostics, which has really, 3 important objectives. One is increasing uptake of diagnostics by addressing key policy and regulatory barriers. And the second one is promoting local manufacturing of diagnostics. And the third is building capacity of institutions for quick and coordinated evaluation of diagnostics. So as you see, those 3 objectives are interrelated, and we have embarked in implementing those important objectives. So from the nature of the Africa CDC, as we are political, a technical institution within political organ, so we have important platforms to make advocacy at higher level. And there are some ongoing efforts. For example, the Africa Medical Device Forum is a working group that involves multiple partners and has also, regulatory authorities and membership from member states, and that's trying to harmonize the requirements of regulatory processes and facilitating validation of diagnostics. And you also heard in this panel, so the establishment of the Africa Medicines Agency, I think that is a very key step for the continent, because we expect, all regulatory process and procedures and facilitation and advocacy at higher level will be managed by that new agency. So that will be a very good step forward. So from our side as Africa CDC, we will mobilize resources to increase research and development in the field of diagnostics. And we have also created centers of excellence for validation of diagnostics quickly and effectively. One barrier, as you know, is every country engages in multiple evaluations and uptake of diagnostics gets delayed. So we have seen that during COVID, for example, we have very, very good diagnostic tools out there, but because of this requirement of multiple validations and some regulatory requirements, most of the tools have not been used. For example, we all depend today on nasopharyngeal swab, which is a little bit cumbersome to collect the specimen, while we have, for example, nasal swab, we have saliva, we have self-testing, and so on. So I think that's a type of thing that we will be involved with. So the other thing is to address some operational challenges that are included in this question, like, for example, infrastructure, utilities, and financial, and so on. I think it's important to establish local manufacturing of diagnostics as a joint venture between the African institution and well-established companies across the world. We have a good example in Ethiopia here, for example, where Ethiopian Ministry of Health has been collaborating with BGI in China, and they established a manufacturing plant here, and the test kits were quite cheap. Transportation cost was minimized, and the access was easy. I think what Dr. Amaru described is also a good example to address those barriers, challenge in terms of access to raw materials and so on. So it will be a good opportunity to collaborate with the existing manufacturing companies. So in a nutshell, as Africa CDC, this is our top priority. We would like to engage partners and member states to push this agenda forward. Once again, thank you for inviting us in this important panel. Over to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to flag something that you said that we have heard in different panels, which is that it's not just the production that should be centered in low and middle income countries, but also further upstream in terms of determining priorities, driving the research and development agenda, and actually doing the research and development in low and middle income countries. And that has got to be part of the concern and their mobilization of political will and, as you say, resources. So thank you so much for flagging that. Now let's turn to Dr. Analia Porras, the Unit Chief of Medicines and Health Technologies, Health Systems and Services, HSS, at PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization. We have a question for you. We would like to hear very much in terms of PAHO's plans to foster local manufacturing, and also a bit about what must be a tension between wanting to support local manufacturers in terms of procurement, but also wanting to procure at the lowest price. So two very different questions, but if you don't mind trying to address both of them. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers and Sharon for the opportunity. Just very briefly, it needless to say, COVID revealed the high dependency in the Latin America and the Caribbean countries had on imports of health technologies from outside the region. A study made by ECLAC estimated that at the beginning of the pandemic, only 4% of Latin American imports originated from the region itself. So that, together with the extreme vulnerability of the international supply chains during the pandemic, having manufactured countries that, regardless of their income level, did not hesitate in imposing trade restrictions for these critical goods, resulted in an unprecedented hardship for us to access not only diagnostic, but other health technologies. So to guide the ministries of health, manufacturers, and other stakeholders on how local production can contribute to an equitable access to diagnostic and other health technologies, PAHO and member states came together and now have advanced a policy document, which is a governing body. So this is adopted by ministries of health, on increasing production capacity for essential medicines and health technologies. It's already been adopted by the Executive Committee, and in September, hopefully will be adopted by the whole Assembly. It's similar to the one adopted by the World Health Organization. It proposes a series of lines of actions to foster local production, to improve the resilience of the health systems, and to provide better access to health products. The document reflects the experience and lessons that we learned from years of trying to improve access to member states. But to summarize, I think it points to the need to look at the entire product cell cycle, from R&D to manufacture, a regulatory strategy, procurement, and use. Manufacturing itself, as we've been hearing, will not solve the problem of access. It would probably not be possible, though, or wise, to have a sustainable strategy recommended that all countries have developed manufacturing capacity for all critical health technologies. Markets do require at certain scale to make them affordable and sustainable. So we should think not only what we're going to sell during an emergency, but also in between emergencies. So we believe that multi-country or regional approaches are key to the sustainability of this solution. Sustainable industrial development requires strengthening governance mechanism, coordinating coherent medium and long-term multi-sectoral commitments, and must generate adequate environment or ecosystem by, I underline, strengthen the regulatory systems, the institution dedicated to scientific research and industrial development, and implementing industrial promotion policies that will come with money not from the Ministry of Health, but the ministries that have the money, which are the industry and economic ministries in the countries. But moreover, we need to have strategies that bring countries together, and we had to counteract the hoarding of health technologies during emergency through geographically diverse and decentralized value chains. Last, to address your question, the regional procurement mechanisms that PAHO have indeed can contribute to this endeavor. We make no difference about what the origin of the product. We try to focus first on quality. So quality is our first and foremost eligibility criteria. And then we have to provide our country's affordability. So that's why we insist that regional productions that bring countries together will bring up the scale and the cost that will make those technologies affordable to all countries. And if you include costs of shipping and other costs, the regionality makes sense for us and will make a sustainable solutions for our countries. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that and making time. And I'm sure there will be some questions for you and coming at the end of the session. Let's now turn to Dr. Taslim Marif Sayed, the Managing Director of CCAMP, the Center for Cellular and Advanced Molecular Platforms, which is a unit of the Department of Biotechnology with the Government of India. So thank you so much for joining. A question for you. Among the organizers of today's workshop, you are known as a champion of technology, and you are currently leading the Discovery to Innovation Accelerator program. We all know that India has experienced a boon with many innovations are now making it to market. A great expansion of manufacturing capacity of finished technology products has expanded. Can you, I'm not going to ask you to respond and represent the government of India, although I'm tempted in terms of what steps are going to be taken to foster more local production and access to other markets. But to start, if you wouldn't mind, can you comment on what you think are some of the key ingredients to India's success in promoting local manufacturing and what could still be improved upon? Thank you so much, and over to you.
No, thank you so much. It's great to be here and delighted to share some of our efforts from here. So, Shannon, to begin with, I think I represent an organization called CCAM, Center for Cellular Molecular Platforms. We are based out of Bangalore. And as you indicated, one of the key mandates for CCAM has been to build impactful innovations. While that has been a conventional and day job, India actually have had now two waves. The second wave being major, disastrous. But the first wave was possibly of in a way soul-finding one, where suddenly in late March 2020, when we went into lockdown, one of the challenge that happened is that India suddenly saw COVID infections happening, but at the same time, we didn't have the tools to test at mass scale. This was largely because of the two major reasons. We heavily were working and were dependent as well on international collaborations and imports for molecular diagnostics, which was short in supply globally. At the same time, the logistics was not available. So think of it, an entire country went into lockdown and we didn't have enough molecular diagnostic testing, which was required when many organizations, including WHO, says test. Here you go for a country of 1.4 to 1.5 billion, we didn't have enough tests locally. The clear answer was that we had to kind of do something on the ground, look at our own backyard and see if we can incentivize the local manufacturing of this molecular diagnostics. We have built two larger programs at CCAM over last 18 months or 14 to 16 months rather, which we have attempted to build capacity of manufacturing, and what we call it as an NBRIC, National Biomedical Resource Indigenization Consortium, in collaboration with DBT, and another very important program called INDEX, which we call it Indigenization of Diagnostics, with a mandate of increasing the capacity locally so that we have the availability while for today, but this had a long-term plan of having molecular diagnostic capacity for long-term in future for any such case scenario that would happen. So as you can imagine, when we look back, the INDEX program, which has been supported by Rockefeller Foundation, which actually identified major gap areas in terms of why local manufacturing hasn't happened as much. Key things came out. There was local manufacturing, but not A, at high scale, B, at high quality. And we had to actually work together with academic strengths in chemistry, biologics, for enzyme, for other productions, as well as for industry to come together and build capability where we identified center of excellences in academia who would help industry and medium scale enterprises to build quality standard, regulatory standard, reagents and kits. At the same time, we were working with other industry for scale up. And over a year where we began with almost very little capacity of testing indigenously, and while we were importing 90% of testing, we today, or after 14 to 16 months, I'm very happy to share that we are about, from our own cohort at CCAM, which would have around 100 odd companies doing different things, reagents, kits, and so on. We have been able to do around 700 to 900,000 tests, RT-PCR tests per day. This is just the RT-PCR test, not even antigen test as we speak. On top of it, we have been able to then work on the rapid tests, LFAs, and other things as well. So what we actually built was an important pan-India, a national program, which brought in government for support, which brought in international foundation, like Rockefeller Foundation for support. We brought in academia for their expertise, deep dive expertise they already have, industry, which were around just about capable, but not really there to pull them up, help them with high quality, help them with scalability, and come together and help them with regulatory. Then we have built something called marketplace, online marketplace, where all these manufacturers can go online, register their products, and buyers can come online and do that. This is where we also want now those regions which now has the capacity for India and hopefully beyond can actually be seen by other countries which are in need of such manufactured products, can go there directly and work with them. So this marketplace is open. It is called Index Marketplace, and people can do that. In terms of how we want to, how we look at this in terms of future, we believe that this is in crisis, we have been able to build a phenomenal model where everyone can come together. And this model, which we call it as a molecular diagnostic catapult, can be also very much useful in future if we can sustain it going forward. We are figuring out how to sustain it, but at the base level, if we can sustain it where we have the understanding of the high quality and the scalability for industry and connection with academia, will be very useful to augment molecular diagnostics and in vitro diagnostics capability for India, for not today, but in long term. I think in the interest of time, I'll not expand on this, but happy to take questions and any points that you can suggest in terms of how such platform can be sustained for long term in collaborations with organizations like WHO, FIND, and so on will be very useful. We may not be right there to understand how do we do that, but any suggestions will be very welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope that someone will write up the experience in terms of all of the resources available and how that has fostered both tech transfer and local production. Let's move now to some questions. I want to thank all of the panelists. You have almost been, all of you, too succinct. No one thought we were going to have enough time for questions and answers, but now we do, which is great. So if you can use the Q&A function, we already have any questions which we'll parse out to the different speakers. Please let me know if you would like to take on one of the questions, although I will direct them, and you can do that by among the panelists by raising your hand, please. But to start, we have a number of questions about raw materials and sourcing of raw materials. So Dr. BK Chow, if you don't mind talking both about BioNote's experience and your recommendations, is what are the main barriers in terms of importing raw materials in order to foster local manufacturers? And for the tech transfer that you explained that you were a part of with a number of different companies in various countries, how do you help them as well get over the barrier in terms of difficulty of accessing raw materials?
So as I explained, so these days, raw material shipment is very and not easy. So as I explained, we try to convert those biological material we try to convert those material used for QC and positive control into artificial control in case shipments and customs clearance is not an issue. That is one solution we are trying to overcome. And also we try to source those material locally, because not easy for a BioNote based in Korea to ship those material to the country. And also we recommend the local side to purchase those material from a commercially available sample bank. That is also one way we try to source those materials.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. We appreciate that you fielding that very large question. So now let's talk about the incentives. What is needed in order to foster the right ecology for local manufacturing, including from the private sector. So we have different models in terms of companies that are not for profit, and then of course the models that are for profit. Given the need to invest CapEx for scale up in terms of either retrofitting or beginning new manufacturing lines, what are the proper incentives? And that means in terms of market access, both outside of the local market, even outside of the regional market, if someone can speak to that. And secondly, the funding to cover the capital costs that are needed in order to stand up facilities. And thirdly, in terms of market segmentation, what is being discussed in terms of trying to avoid the segmentation and the glut of products in order to build in sustainability. So that's one issue with 3 different questions. So first, and I should have said who I was going to call on before I said the questions, but if you don't mind, we'd love to hear from the Africa CDC in terms of what you're hearing from companies and from parastatals, and as well from WAMA, if you don't mind, given your experience. So Dr. Tebeje, can you take on either one of those 3 questions or give your opinion about the set of incentives needed for private sector to engage in terms of the commercial interests of local manufacturing for much needed tests? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So one important incentive is, as you see, for example, if we take Africa, so we have the opportunity in terms of marketing. So we have, large demand in the African continent, especially if you think of diagnostics for infectious diseases. So as you see, Africa address more than 140 outbreaks in a year, which requires, the deployment of diagnostics and therapeutics and so on. So the incentive is there's a market. And then the additional incentive is if we create regulatory processes and procedures that can facilitate easy uptake of diagnostics. So that by itself is also a very big incentive. And then we do have continental bodies like Africa CDC, the Africa Medicines Agency, who can work towards harmonization of the requirements. Therefore, manufacturers will not face, much hurdle in terms of registering diagnostics in every country. So that's additional incentive. And then in some countries, they also have, some infrastructures and countries can dedicate, to subsidize some of the utilities. And then we do have also, human resource that can be easily trained. I think all those are incentives if, companies want to come to Africa in terms of manufacturing diagnostics locally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Felipe, from your point of view for WAMA, what are the set of incentives that have to be in place in terms of whether financial, market-based, like I said, in order to encourage more local manufacturing? Thank you so much.
Okay, for our experience here in Brazil, it's really hard. We have an access for funding. This is make us very dependent from the countries because all the raw material that we produce here in Brazil, it's import from different countries. So we don't, and here actually in Brazil, we don't have access to develop technologies, to develop like our plants to manufacture. But I think this access to funding will be, it's really important because we're going to grow our capacity production and have with this transfer technology, we're gonna have a better infections price for it to be very competitive around the world. So it's very nice. We've been like working in this business for more than 30 years, and it's really tough. You have access to develop your business here in Brazil. In Latin America, this happens as well.
Thank you. Now a question for Dr. Annalisa Porras, if you don't mind. Probably PAHO has the most experience in terms of the pooled procurement, the benefits of pooled procurement across different medical tools. Do you see a benefit of expanding pooled procurement via a global diagnostics facility that could provide entry into markets for some of these local manufacturers in order to ensure stability, sustainability, and also to set a standard for quality, to pool demand in order to attract the suppliers and capture that demand in terms of the and thereby providing the correct set of market-based incentives? What do you think?
Tricky question. I'm gonna get a lot of heat for the answer, but probably not. Our experience at the beginning of the pandemic with a global supply chain was not easy. I think the regionality, the context, the ability to cater to the needs of your own countries and to know the regulatory environment and establish the relationship, it's much easier done at the regional level or even sub-regional level sometimes. There is a lot of difference in low and middle income countries. You know, the global market likes to lump us into a group. And then you look and it's completely different. The regulatory environment for us is completely different than the Africa regulatory environment. So when you go in and you try to cater just globally for the difference of it, usually they get it right, which is different to say, yes, for example, we much depend on the pre-qualification programs, which is a global structure that serves then the regional needs. And that kind of interaction or listing of trusted products is very much welcomed by us. But then the procurement and technical assistance, because I would like to remind the audience that the PAHO funds is not just procurement, it's mostly a technical assistance tool. And we do the regulatory, we have exceptional regulation, regulatory registration, which is one of the key for swift access and adoption of those technologies, because PAHO takes upon doing the quality assurance for countries. So there is a lot involved in trying to be global, which usually is very hard to get right. Yeah, I think there is a lot of need to do global coordination with regional procurement. Some people might disagree. Our experience have shown that we deal much better with emergencies when we are allowed to deal with manufacturers directly and we are not going through a, intermediately at the global level. So willing to take the heat on that one.
Oh, I don't think you're going to have any heat. Can I turn the question then to, in terms of regional procurement, sort of hubs? Let's say if there's a benefit for such to Africa CDC in terms of, have there been discussions perhaps with African Union? Do you expect more support from the Africa Development Bank, from other development banks in being able to realize the benefits of pooled procurement in terms of providing market access to local manufacturers? Do you see the lessons from PAHO that could be applied or replicated for your work in the region? So sorry to put you on the spot, Dr. Tebeje, but if you could give us your personal opinion or your institutional positions as you like. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that's very good experience. So we have seen during COVID, the Africa Union created working as a private institutions, what we call it the African Medical Supplies Platform, where companies get their test kits or any medical device registered, and then countries have also an account into that. And if countries don't have the budget at that time, so they are linked with Afreximbank. We saw that experience to be very helpful during COVID response. And today countries are also getting access to diagnostics and vaccines through that mechanism. So I see it to be a very helpful exercise for Africa as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And can anyone share their experience in terms of the need to provide financial sustainability to companies, to parastatals, to the nonprofits, but also simply because of the margin of scale that they might not have the most competitive price? So there are various examples out there in terms of the allowance and responding to a tender for a local manufacturer, for example. But anyone want to speak to Analia? I'm looking at you, but if anyone else wants to speak to what they consider perhaps best practices.
Just very quickly, because I don't think they are incompatible. We look at full price. So, shipping does make a dent on this, especially during pandemic. And the other thing, there's a practice we have with the procurement of vaccines that we adjudicate to not only to the quality after evaluating quality to the more affordable product, but we give some to the next one, because you want to diversify the market and the supply, and you don't want to be locked into one single supplier, then they might make the others exit the market. So I think there is practices in pool procurement that you can bring in to reward the most affordable, but to give room for a little bit of wiggling room in price just for sustainability. That's why I wanted to bring that 5 cents. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we get back to on the regulatory issues? There's a lot of eggs in the AMA basket. Going back to you, Dr. Tebeje, there's a question in terms of timeline for the realization of AMA in terms of harmonizing the regulatory issues. And do you see that there might be a priority for medicines over diagnostics? And how are we going to make sure that diagnostics and the need for regulatory harmonization won't be squeezed out? Over to you, please.
Thank you again. So the Africa Medicines Agency is being ratified, it's being signed by member states. So hopefully the agency will start work immediately. So it's not the Africa Medicines Agency. It also deals with diagnostics. If we see, the scope of work of its establishment, so it deals with all diagnostics and essential medicines and all those things. But I cannot tell you now what their priorities will be once the institution embarks on the activities. I think that will be something that we will discover. However, as Africa CDC, we are pushing the agenda of diagnostics at higher level at chairperson's office at African Union. So most likely, the Africa Medicines Agency will consider also diagnostics as important priorities. We have seen it during this COVID, how diagnostic access can limit your response to pandemic. So I think it should be a top priority. That's my hope, and that's also our push from the Africa CDC side.
Thank you so much for that. We have 3 more questions, and maybe for the first time ever, a webinar will close early, maybe. But so 3 questions, just to warn all of the speakers that you're about to be called upon, some of you. So 1, you heard about the role of the medicines patent pool in terms of facilitating the realization of what we hope will be non-exclusive licenses that have been offered to CTAP, and we hope there will be more. Do you see, and that is for COVID specifically, but do you see that it would be beneficial given the intellectual property issues, as you heard from Stain, from MSF, the knowledge monopoly on the know-how, and the need for negotiation of fair licensing for the medicines patent pool to expand what has been its business model for medication, specifically to diagnostics? And, you know, for that, I could imagine, given that the out licenses could perhaps benefit a number of the manufacturers and developers on the call, I would like to call on Dr. Amadou Sall from Diagnostics, whether you would like to see such a thing happen. And then Dr. Chakraborty, I'm going to put you absolutely on the spot and see whether CSER has thought about extending its license for the CRISPR technology beyond COVID and for other diseases. So first, if you don't mind, Dr. Amadou Sall, on the questions of the medicines patent pool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think definitely the fact that we don't need any patents would help a lot in bringing the access, because first it would impact the costs. And second, beyond patent, I think what makes things very successful in terms of having this knowledge transfer and know-how is really the quality of the partnership. Because even if you get most of the documentation about what is in the patents, the fact that you work hand in hand with one of the partners, like it happened with us with Bionodes or with Molloy, it gives you a lot of opportunities to go through the different sort of challenge that you have to face when you do knowledge tech transfer. And also when you do training of the group. So that's why I think even though it's very important to focus on making sure like these patents may be available, other options like strong partnership where we have a win-win at the end of the day may be even more important. More specifically, when you talk about Jetropics, we have been working with company that at no point actually requested any sort of funding or compensation for the patent and for the work they have been doing with us. And this is critically important when you try to build something that is financially sustainable and that is also accessible financially speaking. So these are like the 2 comments I wanted to say. Over to you.
Thank you so much for those comments. And Dr. Chakraborty, to put you on the spot in terms of the CRISPR technology. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. So right at the beginning of COVID, it was a general decision that was taken by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, under which it's an umbrella organization with several labs. We are one of the labs, that these COVID technologies would be handed over in a non-exclusive manner. And of course, the Feluda technology for COVID-19 detection, SARS-CoV-2 detection is, of course, has a non-exclusive license. Regarding going ahead from it for other diseases, as we clearly see that there's a lot of potential, particularly for Mendelian disorders and different types of disorders which can be detected as a point of care. I think the general consensus is that it would be on a case-to-case basis for each of these diseases, because there would be sufficient improvement also at the level of the test. It's a platform technology, just like CRISPR is a platform technology with tons of applications. Similarly, this kind of a technology which relies on affinity as opposed to trans cleavage activity, such as some of the other CRISPRs do, is also a platform technology and can be applied or tweaked based on the need for that particular detection. So I think we are absolutely open to having discussions with, I must say that we are not a company or we are not a manufacturer. We are a scientific institute researchers. So we of course have the solutions, we can show them as a prototype, but the scale up and the manufacturing would have to be probably done by at the end point by the different manufacturers. And we are absolutely open to discussing how this can be done. We have a patent that has been filed with some more patents, but like I said, that this is all open to discussion for every single disease. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you being a good sport that I just put you on the spot. I was going to ask your child, but I thought you should be the one to answer it. So now I just have, we went through a number of building blocks. People coalesce around some of the priorities that includes funding. Where is it going to come from? For both R&D to recognize the bell that Africa CDC consistently raises in terms of again making sure that we're not just talking about downstream but upstream as well. So funding, where is it going to come from? Who decides and how? And then secondly, and I don't mean to cover all the building blocks as Spring went through them, but the need for this technology transfer partnership. The pulling the know-how to making it available, not just the out licenses, but the true technology transfer partnership. And you see some good examples of the bilateral relationships between BioNote and their partners, what FIND has been able to do. Thank you so much, FIND, in terms of working with Diatropics and the other two developers from the UK, US, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the other one, the work by WAMA and all of the resources that CCAMP and the government of India is bringing to the fore in order to facilitate local production. But there's two missing pieces: the tech transfer partnership. It doesn't need to be a global solution, but something that is where people can avail themselves of, and the funding. So just based on talking to some of the actors that worked on organizing this call, who have a lot more experience, the development banks seem to be going on their own in terms of what they think are some clever ideas. And then you've got the high income country donors that are shaping, again, the global health architecture, where all of the marbles are pointing towards global health resilience and pandemic preparedness and response as they see it. So where is the coalescing in terms of what the true priorities are for low and middle income countries going to come from, rather than not being in the room when it happens in terms of making these priorities? So I suggest that, as we move forward, this working group, which is looking at technical tools, that we also think about having a set of consensus statements and calls to action to try to coalesce some force, let's say, cohesiveness between the needs in low and middle income countries and donor good ideas that might be absolutely missing the mark. And missing the mark in terms of pro access. So we've got these great models in terms of nonprofit, cost of goods, for example, missing the mark in terms of suitability, and missing the mark in terms of sustainability as well. So I hope that you all have found this to be helpful. And obviously, as all good webinars and discussions do, it reveals more problems, but also some opportunities. What we're not short on, obviously, is the will to be able to get some things done. So I just want to provide a sincere thank you for the panelists for taking part in this discussion. I appreciate your time and your frankness and your brevity, which is shocking, frankly, based on all the other webinars I've ever been on. So Judith, I'd like to now turn it over to you since I've taken all of the oxygen out of the room by talking too much. So Judith.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon and Emmanuel, for this outstanding moderation of these two roundtables. I think if I could, I would be clapping. I think it's been very well done, and also, of course, to all the speakers and experts that have joined us and all the questions that have been raised. We are coming to a close for today's technical workshop. On behalf of the co-organizers, the World Health Organization, FIND, and UNDP, thank you for your active participation. We hope it's been a good use of your time. The recording of this event will be made available after this meeting. So I will not aim, and it will be impossible after Sharon Ann, to summarize this rich discussion, but I would like to highlight some of the key points that I think were raised, as well as next steps for this coalition of the willing. On key points, most of the attention on this pandemic that is afflicting the planet has been on innovation and access to vaccines, but innovation in diagnostics has continued. And increasing access to diagnostics is equally important. I have seen that many of you, around 200 participants, has followed the whole session, and many of you have followed through the whole session. This really confirms that there is a global interest in strategies to increase access to diagnostics in low and middle income countries. We have also seen an impressive level of questions and also comments and work shared by many experts in the field. I think we're confirmed. Access to diagnostics is in the maps. It should be a core priority of anybody working on global health. Increasing access to diagnostics requires a variety of strategies, and they're all important. But in this workshop, we have focused on one, the local production in low and middle income countries, and the work of a group of partners and agencies and experts are doing to strengthen collaboration and synergies among our work. We are open, as Dr. Jenny Molloy, our chair, highlighted, we're open to partnerships and collaboration with others and to improve our work and connect it to the work that many others are doing. We have heard from you that we should continue this work, that some of the work we're doing might be helpful. And we have also heard from you that you are eager to see the release of the publications and the work we've been doing. So we will accelerate our work, and we will aim, as the Spring mentioned, to release our work in the public domain, hopefully by the fall of this year. We have also heard, I think, that not all local production is equal, and that there are some key principles that should guide our work. And I think the work of everybody interested in promoting local production of diagnostics. So some key principles. I have 5, most likely there are more. Access. We need to ensure that access and public health is the cornerstone of all our efforts. We need affordability, quality, and equitable availability for all low and middle income countries to be at the core of our efforts, as well as transparency and sustainability. COVID might be a wake-up call, but we need to go beyond COVID. COVID-19 has highlighted the access and supply challenges to diagnostics in many countries, but the challenges are broader than COVID, and the solution should therefore be comprehensive and include other epidemics, other diseases, as well as other future global health threats. We need a whole government and whole society approach, including the need for collaborations with and between public sector, academia, private sector, and civil society, as well as national, regional, and global actors and initiatives. Ecosystem. The ecosystem of a strategy is needed. I think everybody's made the case, and all the interventions are important and should not be forgotten. We have talked about funding, we have talked about incentives, we have talked about infrastructure and human resources capacity building. We have talked about public health-driven technology transfer and intellectual property management, like the one CTAP and the Medicines Patent Pool are exploring. We have talked about planning for market dynamics and access earlier in any research and development, as well as local production effort. We have talked about a strengthened regulatory harmonization and effectiveness, as well as procurement and supply management policies that promote economies of scale and locally and regional manufactured technologies. And finally, we have said policy coherence and enabling environments are key. We need, in this workshop, we have reiterated the importance of policy coherence and the need for all of us within our duties and responsibilities to advocate and make sure that we're promoting an enabling environment to support local production in low and middle income countries. So what are our goals for next steps as the working group? So we will build on your feedback in this first workshop. We will continue to collect feedback as our colleagues at FINE will now hopefully, I believe, share a slide and a survey that you can fill and you can basically tell us first if you want to continue receiving information about this work. We would love that you say yes to that, please, as well as an email address that you can use to contact us if you want more information about any of the pieces of the work, and then we will redirect it to the right member in the working group to follow up with you. As I mentioned, the working group under the wise leadership of Dr. Jenny Molloy will continue working on the 3 deliverables that were presented today. And we hope, our hope at this moment is a more public and broader meeting in the fall of 2021, where we will present hopefully final versions of the documents we're working on. And we will continue supporting the WHO Costa Rica CTAP initiative in promoting technology transfer and local production of diagnostics and other health technologies as much as needed. Well, that's all from us. Thank you very much again on behalf of the co-organizers, the World Health Organization, FINE, and UNDP. And I would like to extend a special thanks to the FINE team that worked to make this event possible, including Martha, Sarah, Jane, and Jane. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and peace be with you.